Alright, this is a 2017 Honda Civic with a 1.5 turbo motor, gasoline direct injection. It's got, let's see, it's got just under 110,000 miles on it, and as you can see, the current mileage hangs, miles per gallon rather, hangs just around 33 miles per gallon, which is significantly less than this car used to get new. When this car was new, average was close to 38, something like this, depending on how I was driving it. And now it's clearly less. So now it's C33 for trip A, 33 for trip B over the last 4,000 miles or so. So mileage has significantly reduced. And it kind of feels like the power too a little bit. There's a little bit of hesitation. It still goes, there's no check engine lights or anything like that. It works fine, but it does feel like it's a little bit underpowered. So I suspect there may be some fouling on the intake valves, which does happen with the gasoline direct injection engines. And specifically this particular car, the boost pressure has been raised a little bit. I think plus 6 psi, I believe, over most of its life. So maybe that caused the issue a little. Or actually made it worse a little bit. Not caused it, but maybe this made the issue a little bit worse. So today we're going to take it apart. We're going to see the look at the intake manifold, the intake valves, and yeah, see how bad it is. So the thing we'll be looking at is this right here, this plastic piece in the back of the engine. This is the intake manifold. That's where the air, the pressurized air from the turbo through the intercooler gets fed into the engine. That right there, aluminum, what you see is the engine block. Or the engine head rather, and that's where the air comes in. The valves are there, and you know the rest. So the way it goes is air enters here through the air box. There's an air filter. It goes through this charge hose tube into this. I'm not sure what to call this. Basically, on this side of the engine, this is where the exhaust manifold is. There's a turbo underneath there. You can't see it, but the exhaust gases are spinning the turbo, and the turbo has an impeller here that compresses the incoming air. Okay, so it compresses that air, and that air through this hose, I believe, yes, pretty sure, goes down to the intercooler. Okay, it gets cooled and then continues through this piping, through this elbow, and into the intake manifold. There's a bunch of sensors there, as you can see. This, I believe, is the pressure, absolute pressure sensor. So MAP, I guess. Looks like there may be another one here. I'm not sure what this one is, but it's also some kind of sensor. And here on the intake side before the turbo, there's the mass airflow sensor, MAF. We may have to look at this thing as well. So we're going to take the intake manifold off first to take a look at the valves. I'm probably not going to film it because I don't see an easy way to do that, to be honest. But the basic idea is there are bolts. There's one. There's a stud with a nut on it. Yeah, you just basically undo all of those and take the thing off. It's fairly simple. May have to disconnect some of the hoses. And after that, we will probably take this part off, whatever that's called, to take a look at the turbo impeller. Yeah, to see if there's any damage there. Maybe that's our problem. So that's another thing we're gonna do. Yeah, let's get to it.
The charge pipe has been removed, which allows us access to the turbo. So we're going to take a look at the impeller. This is the cold side impeller. This is the impeller that compresses incoming air. And what you look for is any damage to the impeller itself. And you also want to make sure that there is very little, if any, lateral play and virtually no axial play, which happens to be the case here. So we know the turbo is good. So we have now removed the plastic intake manifold, which allows us access to the intake ports, and we can finally take a look at the valves. It's a little awkward to film here. I'm doing this on the cell phone, so I'm going to give you guys the best picture I can of those intake valves. All right, so you can see one of the cylinders here. It's a little hard to make out. Hopefully it'll focus. Let's see. Here's a better angle on one of the valves. As you can see, the whole intake port definitely has some fouling. On the walls, you can clearly see some of that crud, and on the valves themselves. But it's nowhere near as bad as what I was expecting to find. There is not a large amount of deposits, nothing that will actually restrict the airflow and cause the issue we're having. We're looking at all the valves once more. So this is cylinder 1. This one is cylinder 2. A little hard to focus on it. There you go, cylinder 2. Cylinder 3. So they're all pretty typical. Basically, they're not as bad as I thought they were going to be, and this is not something that would cause the issue that we're trying to troubleshoot. I was originally expecting to find heavy crud deposits on the valves, which would restrict the airflow, and I was basically getting ready to media blast these or walnut blast or something like that to get rid of those deposits. But given the condition that they're in, it's really not necessary. I think it's not worth the effort. So we're going to assume that these valves are good, and we're not going to do anything else to them, which is basically may use some chemical solution to clean them or something like that, but we're not going to use a media blast method. So the valves proved to be not the issue. To be quite honest, at this point, I was at quite a loss because I was sure it was the fouling on the valves that was causing this, but it wasn't because we opened them up and the valves were actually in much better shape than I anticipated. The turbo was also operating fine. It looked like it was not damaged. There was no play in the bearings or anything like that. I decided to pull the plugs while I was there just to take a look, and they were old. I exchanged these plugs maybe 30 to 40,000 miles ago, something like that. So we're not factory original, but they're in good shape, so no issue there. Another thing to rule out is the mass airflow sensor. It's this guy right here. It's sitting in the air box, and it's measuring the flow of air basically for the correct air to fuel mixture. I used a special cleaner, which I'll throw up on the screen right here, and I used the same cleaner to also clean the MAP, which is the absolute manifold pressure sensor back here. It's similar to brake cleaner. You just kind of spray things down and wait for it to evaporate. The end result looks something like this. After cleaning the sensors and putting everything back together, I drove the car for several hundred miles normally just to see if what we've done so far would make any difference. And unfortunately, it did not. As you can see, the mileage did not improve at all. If anything, it just even got a little worse. Though this is probably just the way I was driving during this period of time. But this clearly did not resolve the problem I was having. So just to recap what we've done so far. Now, I obviously checked and cleaned the air filter. That's not even in video. I did that beforehand. I checked the intake valves for fouling and found very little. visually inspected the cold side of the turbo impeller and found it to be in good working order, and also cleaned MAF and MAP sensors. So at this point, the problem could be related to maybe the cylinder compression or fuel system, or maybe even the ECU. But before moving on to those systems, there was one more thing I wanted to check.
All right, we're going to try something else today. We're going to make sure that there is, we're going to make sure that the intake manifold actually takes the pressure and there are no intake leaks. And to do that, we're going to pressurize the intake and to see if it can hold at least any pressure for maybe just a little bit. Obviously there are leaks, so small ones. I'm not expecting this to be just able to hold the pressure, but for a few seconds I think it should. So what I did here is this is the air box where the air gets sucked in, right? There's a filter in there. Then there's normally this hose connecting the air box to the intake manifold, this thing, which sits on top of the turbo. Turbo is right below that, and it's got all kinds of different hoses going to different places. There's one going to the intake here further upstream, or downstream, I suppose. Then there's this one connecting to this module. I'm not sure what this is, but what I did basically is I disconnected it and I connected a pressure testing kit to it. You can get this thing at Home Depot. You can just build one yourself. So obviously I capped this here, just a regular flexible cap. And what we're going to do is we're just going to connect some pressurized air to this valve right here and see if we develop any pressure. Now I'm using just an air compressor for this, and when you do that, obviously you got to make sure you don't crank it up all the way to like 110 psi or whatever, 120 psi or whatever that thing is rated for, because it's just, these systems are not designed, the intake is not designed to handle this kind of pressure, and you may just damage something, maybe a seal, like an oil seal in the turbo or something, will get squeezed out or whatever the case. But basically the idea is don't apply too much pressure to it. Keep it to, I don't know, 20 psi, something like that, whatever the turbos are rated for usually. But having said that, let's try it. So see what's happening is I'm applying the pressure. It goes up to maybe 1 psi. But it drops off very fast. And I hear a pretty loud hissing coming out from the intercooler area here. So I suspect there is a leak. Alright, so this is the intercooler. Now this is that side. Two sides to it, obviously, so. Alright. This side is the one where the leak seemed to have been coming from. And I noticed this during last time I took it apart, that, see the way it's crimped over here? It wasn't crimped properly, meaning that one end, it kind of still is, you could see right here. There's not a good seal, I don't think, right here. And I'm sure it was crimped properly at the factory, but it kind of looked like this area took some kind of hit. So I'm not sure if I went over something, or maybe there was a piece of debris that went in there, or whatever happened. But it seemed, yeah, you could totally see how it's crooked over here. And I don't know if this is fixable or not. Probably. It doesn't look like any of the plastic is cracked, so it's just a matter of crimping it properly. But, you know, my intercooler is already pretty beat up, even though I reversed it last time. See, I used this side up for the last 1,000 or 2,000 miles or something. I still decided to replace it, just to rule that out. So I got a new one right here that we're going to install, and hopefully that solves our problem. Yeah, as you can see, the crimping here is nice and strong and even. So replacing this should definitely eliminate, or at least rule out, a leaky. Yeah, look at that. That's new. I don't know if this was done in shipping or whatever. Not a big deal. So let's see if this fixes our problem. I'm gonna install this now. Well, this is exciting. So I put everything together, right? And I checked the pressure, and the pressure is 0. There's like no pressure at all. So much worse than what it was before. I'm trying to figure this out. What can this possibly be? This is what? You see this groove? This is the new intercooler. This is the old intercooler. Notice the difference? The new intercooler doesn't come with seals. So I have to reuse these old seals, which they're still good. They're not broken or anything, but I'm just so surprised that it doesn't come with them. Yeah. You live, you learn. All right. One more time, this time with seals. Let's see if that makes a difference. So, same setup, nothing has changed. All we did is we replaced the intercooler, kept the old seals, same setup. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's holding pressure. Look at that. Can you see it's at 1 psi? Slowly falling. Totally. Yeah, it's holding pressure. It is holding pressure. That was it, wasn't it? Okay. I think we found our problem, or at least a problem. I don't know if this is gonna solve all of our issues, but this is definitely something that would cause the symptoms we're having, which is, some hesitation. It felt like turbo took too long to spool up. It did develop power, but it felt sluggish at first. And also the gas mileage. Gas mileage was down like 20%. 15-20%, something like that. Yeah. So this would do it. Now let's put everything back together and take it for a spin. This is the area I was telling you about. So with the bumper on, you can see that little deflector is bulging here. There's nothing I can do to bring it back in. On the other side, it's flush. Here, slightly bulging, and then, sure enough, hit something, maybe a curb, some more here, maybe a rock. Oh yeah. Yeah, the power comes on a lot quicker, I think. The lag is significantly reduced, in my opinion.
Well, I'm happy to report that this seemed to have done the trick. As you can see, the gas mileage improved significantly from low 30s to almost 40. Well, for this trip, it was over 40 to to be honest, but it's not typical. It will probably stay closer to 38, 39, which is what I was getting before. So I would call this success.